The sun was setting in brilliant hues of orange and pink as I parked my car in front of the small, quiet house that had been my home for the last decade. I was 45 years old, recently retired from a career that had taken everything out of me, years spent as a high school teacher, shaping young minds, dealing with stress, and coping with the heartbreak of losing my husband, who had died in a car accident 5 years ago. Life had been different since then, quieter. My house was on the outskirts of town, and I had embraced the simplicity of my routine. I was comfortable with the solitude, gardening, reading, taking long walks along the narrow paths near my house. That is, until my stepson, Henry, called me unexpectedly one late spring afternoon, changing everything. Henry was 24, fresh out of art school, and he had always been passionate about photography. He wanted to move to the city and pursue his dream, but things hadn't been going well. The competitive nature of the industry had left him struggling to secure work, and the mounting expenses of city life were beginning to overwhelm him. We had never been close. His father and I married when Henry was already a teenager, and I always had the feeling that he looked at me as an outsider who had come into his life suddenly. Since his father had passed, he'd been distant, and I respected that, understanding that it might be his way of coping. When my phone rang, I was surprised to see his name pop up on the screen. "Hey, Marie," he said, his voice tinged with hesitance. I could tell he was nervous, and I had a feeling I knew what he was going to say before he said it. "Hey, Henry," I replied warmly, trying to ease his nerves. "It's been a while. How are you?" He sighed, and I heard a pause before he spoke. "I need a favor." His words carried the weight of someone who wasn't used to asking for help, and I immediately felt my heart sink a little. He explained his situation, the struggle of paying rent, the uncertainty of his future, and before he even finished, I found myself saying, "Of course, Henry. You can stay here for as long as you need. Until you get back on your feet, you're more than welcome here." After I said the words, I felt a strange mixture of relief and nervousness. Relief because I knew Henry needed help, and I was in a position to give it. Nervousness because, for years now, my home had been my sanctuary. It was mine, and mine alone, and I hadn't shared my space with anyone since my husband's passing. I was used to my own rhythms, my own silence, and the thought of someone coming into that, especially a young man who had lived a different life entirely, left me feeling anxious. But there was no turning back now. I made preparations for his arrival, cleaning up the spare room that had collected dust over the years, rearranging the furniture, buying fresh sheets and fluffy pillows. I even picked up his favorite cereal from when he was younger, one of those silly things you do when you're not quite sure how else to make someone feel welcome. The morning that Henry was due to arrive, I woke up early and went through the final checklist. I made sure everything was perfect in the guest room, stopped the bathroom with fresh towels, and baked a loaf of banana bread. As the hours ticked by, I found myself growing increasingly nervous. This wasn't just about having a house guest. It was about disrupting a life that had become predictable, a life that had given me comfort and solace when I needed it most. Henry was about to change that, and I wasn't sure I was ready. When I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, I took a deep breath and went outside to greet him. Henry stepped out of his beat-up sedan, and I was taken aback. It had been years since I'd seen him, and the young man before me wasn't the awkward teenager I remembered. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his hair longer than I remembered. He had grown up. He had the look of someone who had faced hardships and wasn't afraid of them, but there was also a vulnerability in his eyes, a tiredness that hinted at what he had been through. "Hey, Marie," he said, giving me a small smile as he walked up to the porch. His voice was deeper, his presence more confident, yet something felt both familiar and new. I hugged him, an awkward, quick hug, as if we were both unsure of what the boundaries were between us. His scent was woodsy and clean, a mix of cologne and something else, and I found myself caught off guard by how much he had changed. "Welcome," I said, stepping back and smiling up at him. "I hope the drive wasn't too bad." "It was fine," he said, brushing it off. "Thanks for letting me stay here." "Really?" "Of course, Henry." "Your family," I replied, trying to sound as sincere as I could. I wanted him to know that he was welcome, even if I wasn't entirely sure how this would go. The first few days were relatively uneventful. Henry mostly stayed in his room or went out to look for jobs. I gave him space, not wanting to be the overbearing stepmother, and he seemed content with that. Slowly, however, things began to change. The house started to feel different. There was an energy that hadn't been there before, an energy I had forgotten, one that came from sharing a space with someone else. There was life in the house again, and I began to notice small things. The way Henry smiled at me across the dinner table, the way he lingered in the kitchen to talk to me about his day, how he'd offer to help me with my gardening. One evening, about 2 weeks after he moved in, I went to bed early, as I often did. It was a quiet night, and I had drifted off to sleep when I heard the faint sound of my bedroom door creaking open. Groggy, I turned over to see Henry standing there, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. "Henry," I mumbled, my voice thick with sleep. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated, stepping into the room, his tall frame seeming almost unsure. I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice soft, as he walked closer to the bed. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the grogginess. "What's wrong?" I asked, concern etching my voice. He hesitated for a moment, then sat down on the edge of the bed, the mattress sinking under his weight. There was something different about him in that moment, a rawness that caught me off guard. He looked down at his hands, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I guess I'm just feeling a bit lost," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart softened, and without thinking, I reached out, placing my hand gently on his arm, offering a small gesture of comfort. "It's okay to feel that way," I whispered. "Everyone goes through rough patches. You'll figure it out. I promise." For a moment, our eyes met, and there was something in the air between us, something unspoken. I couldn't quite describe it, but I felt it deep in my chest. I should have pulled away, should have said something to break the tension, but instead, I let my hand linger on his arm a little longer than necessary. Henry looked at me, his eyes soft, his face vulnerable. "Thanks, Marie," he said, his voice barely audible. He stood up slowly, his gaze lingering on me for just a moment longer before he turned and walked back to his room. As the door clicked shut behind him, I lay back down, my heart racing. I didn't know what to make of the moment we had just shared. Was I imagining things, or had something changed between us? The next morning, everything seemed normal. Henry was his usual self, chatting with me over breakfast about his job search, his plans for the day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us. Every time we passed each other in the hallway, his hand would brush against mine, or he would look at me just a second longer than he should have. These moments were subtle, fleeting, but they were enough to make me question what was happening. Days turned into weeks, and the connection between us continued to grow, but we were careful to respect our boundaries. We found comfort in each other's presence in small ways, sitting together to watch TV, helping each other in the kitchen, working on projects together. There was an unspoken understanding between us, one that provided solace, but never overstepped the lines we had set. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when I found myself questioning everything. Was this right? Was this fair to either of us? But then, in those small moments, when Henry would offer to help me with something, or when he would sit with me in the garden, I would feel a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Henry's presence brought life back into my home, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine sense of happiness. There was a warmth between us, one built on trust and understanding, and while it was unconventional, it was something we both needed. We both knew we still had a lot to figure out, and that whatever this was, it needed to be handled with care. But for now, we were content to take things one day at a time, to enjoy the moments of laughter and the growing connection between us. Life was far from perfect, but it was starting to feel like something I could embrace again. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you subscribe to this channel for more videos.